Walter White is the definition of monotony. He wakes up early, drinks a bland cup of coffee next to his wife, Skylar, and his son, Walter Jr., then heads off to a day that could easily be copied and pasted from any other. At school, he teaches chemistry to students who barely pay attention. In the afternoon, he clocks in for his second job at a car wash, where he's not just washing cars, but also what's left of his dignity, treated like a nobody. His life is a never-ending loop of frustration and disrespect. But boredom vanishes in an instant. Walter collapses at work, and after a series of tests, he gets the worst kind of gift: terminal lung cancer. The doctor drops the news with all the warmth of a voicemail from the DMV, while Walter hears nothing but a ringing in his ears. His life was already bad. Now it has an expiration date. And worse, he has nothing to leave for his family. Walter tags along with his DEA agent brother-in-law, Hank, on a drug bust at a meth lab. While Hank plays TV action hero, Walter watches the operation with a little too much interest. But the real kicker, he spots someone escaping through a window and recognizes him immediately. Jesse Pinkman, former student, expert in not paying attention. And that's when something clicks in Walter's head. He doesn't see crime, he sees opportunity. Without wasting time, he tracks Jesse down and lays it out. They're going to cook meth.
You want to cook crystal meth?
Jesse laughs at first, but quickly realizes he doesn't have a choice. If he says no, Walter could turn him into the DEA. Plus, as crazy as it sounds, Jesse knows he needs a real chemist, and Walter is exactly that. Before long, they buy an RV, head out to the desert, and the show begins. Walter puts on an apron, slides on safety goggles, and does what he was born to do. The result? The purest meth Jesse has ever seen. Not blue yet, but perfection is already in the air. But the drug game isn't as simple as mixing chemicals. Jesse tries to sell the product but runs into Emilio, a dealer who recognizes Walter from the DEA bust. Tension skyrockets. The solution? Kidnap Jesse and Walter and handle things the old-fashioned way: violence. But the old Walter White is already disappearing. Thinking fast, he uses his knowledge to improvise a toxic gas, taking out the dealers and escaping death. He's no longer just a frustrated teacher. He just crossed a line, and for the first time in his life, he feels something new. Walter White died in that desert, and in his place, the beginning of Heisenberg was born. Out in the middle of the desert, Walter and Jesse face the chaos they just unleashed. Emilio, dead. Crazy 8, half dead. The RV won't start. Jesse wants to run and pretend none of this ever happened, but Walter has already switched into cold, logical chemistry mode. They need to clean up. No traces left behind. Jesse is in full-blown panic mode, while Walter stays eerily calm, already planning their next move. The next morning, Walter heads home and does what any first-time criminal would do. Acts like nothing happened. He sits at the breakfast table, eats with Skylar and Walter Jr., pretends to care about small talk, but then the phone rings.
Well, too bad, man, because guess what? He's still not dead.
Walter plays it cool, acting like just another suburban dad with 0 skeletons in the closet. At school, he slips back into his normal routine, teaching a lesson on chirality, molecules that look identical but behave differently. A not so subtle metaphor for what's happening to him. Meanwhile, Jesse gets home only to realize he's got a brand new problem. Crazy 8 is gone. Yup, the guy who was supposed to be unconscious decided to take a little field trip. Jesse freaks out, but before things get worse, Walter arrives just in time to find Crazy 8 stumbling down the street like a zombie. They drag him back and lock him in the basement. Jesse wants to end it quickly, just kill him and move on, but Walter hesitates. Maybe they can work something out, but deep down, Walter knows the real question isn't can he kill Crazy 8. It's should he? This time, it wouldn't be an accident. It would be a choice. Now, onto the other problem. Emilio. Walter, ever the scientist, suggests dissolving the body in hydrofluoric acid. No shallow graves, no suspicious fires, just pure chemistry. Jesse thinks it's messed up, but agrees. They divide the work. Walter deals with Crazy 8. Jesse handles Emilio. Walter gives one very important technical detail. The acid has to go in a special plastic container. So what does Jesse do? The exact opposite. He figures the bathtub is just as good as a plastic container, dumps the acid in, and waits for the problem to disappear. Meanwhile, Skylar knows something's off. She digs around, finds out about Jesse, and decides to confront him like a mom who just found weed in her kid's room. She makes it clear, if he keeps hanging around Walter, she'll call the DEA. Jesse realizes Skylar is going to be a problem, but for now, he's got much bigger issues. Walter returns to Jesse's house and finds a total nightmare. The bathroom looks like a horror movie set. The ceiling is caved in, and what's left of Emilio is now everywhere.
That stupid plastic container I asked you to buy.
On an otherwise ordinary day, Skylar is chatting with Marie, just making small talk, until a casual comment sets off Marie's radar. To her, it's obvious. Walter Jr. is smoking weed. Skylar tries to brush it off, but Marie won't let it go. If she ignores it, it might be too late. Skylar, on the other hand, doesn't know what's worse: her sister's over-the-top paranoia, or the very real possibility that she might be right. Meanwhile, down in Jesse's basement, Crazy 8 is still chained up. His body is stuck, but his mind is working overtime. He watches, listens, processes. He talks to Walter, dropping bits of information he shouldn't have. He's trying to build rapport, to humanize himself in Walter's eyes. It's a mind game. If he seems harmless enough, maybe he walks out of this alive. But Jesse has already made up his mind. He reminds Walter about the coin toss. He already took care of Emilio. Dealing with Crazy 8 isn't his problem. That's on Walter. Meanwhile, Hank decides to teach Walter Jr. a lesson the old-fashioned way. He takes him to a rundown neighborhood, the kind of place where addicts wander the streets like ghosts. No sugarcoating. He points at them and lays it out. This is where drugs take you. To drive the point home, he brings over a strung-out prostitute to share her story. The message is clear. Hank is not about to let his nephew end up like this. Back in the basement, Walter holds the key to the lock. His mind is made up. Crazy 8 is going free. But something nags at him. He turns and looks at the floor. The shattered plates, pieces scattered, one missing. That's all he needs to know. Crazy 8 was never trying to negotiate his way out. He was waiting for the right moment to strike. Walter freezes for a second, but the choice has already been made for him. There's no way out of this. He grabs the chain and strangles Crazy 8. At the same time, Hank is still investigating. He's back in the area where Walter and Jesse cooked their meth, searching for clues. And he finds them. Crazy 8's car, traces of the drug, tiny details that, on their own, don't mean much, but put together, they start forming a bigger picture. Hank and the DEA analyze a new meth sample and they're blown away. 99.1% pure. This isn't just any street-level cook. Hank starts connecting the dots. Crazy 8 is missing. Emilio too. And now, a product like this shows up, someone new is in the game. Someone who could change everything. Meanwhile, at the White House, a family barbecue seems normal until Skylar, out of patience, pushes Walter to tell the truth. So he does. Lung cancer. The table falls silent. Marie is shaken. Hank tries to lighten the mood with a joke, but Skylar isn't in the mood for deflections. Jesse, on the other hand, is trying to sell the meth he cooked, but whatever respect he thought he had is gone. No one takes him seriously. Without Walter, he's just another nobody. No power, no influence, no leverage. Desperate for stability, he tries to reconnect with his family, only to get kicked out when his parents find weed in the house. It's not even his, it's his little brother's. Skylar manages to book an appointment with one of the best oncologists in the country, but the good news comes with a gut punch. $90,000. Walter hesitates. Is the treatment even worth it? He doesn't want to bury his family in debt, but he also won't say what he's really thinking. The pressure builds. Skylar wants him to fight, to at least try, but Walter refuses to make a decision based on emotion.
Just give up and die.
Walter does something that makes no sense. He walks up to a luxury car, shoves a gasoline-soaked sponge into the fuel tank, and sets it on fire. This isn't about money. It's not about logic. It's about him. And he's not the same Walter White anymore. Jesse decides to take a break from the drug game and tries to get a legit job. He hypes himself up as a top-tier salesman, but reality hits him hard. He's got 0 qualifications. In the end, he's stuck spinning signs on the street, a humiliating gig for someone who once ran his own empire. Meanwhile, Walter and Skylar attend a fancy event, the birthday party of Elliot Schwartz, Walter's former partner at Gray Matter. And just like that, Walter, already drowning in frustration, finds himself surrounded by rich people living the life that should have been his. The tension off the charts. At the party, Elliot offers Walter a job at Gray Matter, but when he finds out about the cancer, he ups the ante. He wants to cover Walter's treatment. Easy fix, right? Yeah, not so much. Walter's pride is bigger than his tumor, so he shuts that down immediately. Accepting help would mean admitting defeat. And for Walter, that's worse than dying. Across town, Jesse crosses paths with Badger, who's just as lost as he is. They vent about their failures, and, shocker, they go back to the one thing they actually know, cooking meth, but their partnership is a disaster. Badger treats it like a joke, cutting corners and winging everything. The final product? Pure garbage. That's when Jesse realizes that without Walter, he can't produce the same high-quality meth. Back at the White House, Skylar stages a family intervention to convince Walter to take Elliot's money. There's crying, emotional appeals, and even Walter Jr. calling his dad a coward. After all the pressure, Walter finally pretends to cave and says he'll accept the money. Skylar thinks she's won, poor thing, but Walter has other plans. Instead of taking Elliot's offer, he decides to fund his treatment his own way, by cooking meth. And at the end of the episode, he returns to Jesse with a simple proposal. Let's cook. Jesse, out of options and well aware of his solo incompetence, agrees. Walter lays down the law. He's in charge now. He handles the chemistry and production, while Jesse deals with distribution. No clients for Walter, and most importantly, no violence. This is a clean, efficient business, and nothing can spiral out of control. Skylar asks about Elliot's check. Walter, now a professional liar, tells her it's already deposited. Of course, it's not. But for now, Skylar buys it. At school, Chemo starts hitting Walter hard. During a lesson on chemical explosions, he passes out in the bathroom. Talk about making an impression. Hugo, the kind-hearted janitor, helps him recover. Meanwhile, Jesse finally notices the radiation marks on Walter's chest. Suddenly it all clicks. The cancer, the urgency, the craziness. It all makes sense now. For the first time, he sees Walter in a different light. But Walter isn't satisfied. He doesn't want pocket change. He wants real money. He finds out Jesse is selling their meth retail style. Slow, inefficient, and risky. Walter demands that Jesse find a serious distributor. Problem is, Jesse doesn't exactly have a Rolodex of top-tier drug lords. But then he remembers a name, Tuco, a violent, unpredictable, absolutely unhinged drug dealer. Meanwhile, Hank's investigation leads him to Walter's school. He finds a stolen lab mask and traces it back to the chemistry department. To make matters worse, he goes straight to Walter, asking if he's noticed anything suspicious in the school's inventory. Walter, cool as ever, plays dumb and throws Hank off the scent. Jesse, on the other hand, goes to Tuco's hideout with a kilo of meth, thinking he'll walk out with a fat stack of cash. Cute. Instead, Tuco beats him to a pulp and straight up steals the meth. Result? Hospital. Now, Walter is out of partner, out of product, and out of payday. And this is where everything changes. Walter takes control. He shaves his head. Walter White is gone. Heisenberg is born. He walks into Tuco's territory like he owns the place. He doesn't ask. He demands $50,000, $35,000 for the stolen meth, and $15,000 for the beating Jesse took. Tuco laughs. Big mistake. Walter pulls out his trump card. Mercury fulminate. A massive explosion takes out part of the building. And Tuco suddenly realizes this bald guy isn't messing around. Impressed, Tuco agrees to do business with Walter. He leaves not just with the money, but with something even bigger, respect. Walter White is no longer just a desperate teacher. He's a criminal. He's Heisenberg. At the parent-teacher meeting, the DEA is in full detective mode. The school's trying to downplay the situation, but they're not buying it. One officer even suggests bringing in drug-sniffing dogs and doing locker searches. If they had the chance, he'd probably set up a DEA outpost right in the teacher's lounge. Meanwhile, Jesse decides it's time to move out. After Tuco's beatdown and that apocalyptic-level chemistry session in the bathroom, his house is giving off serious horror movie vibes. He wants a fresh start, or at least to stop tripping over past trauma every time he walks into his bedroom. And Walter, well, Walter is starting to enjoy this life. Without even consulting Jesse, he marches straight to Tuco and pitches a new deal, 2 pounds of meth per week. Walter seems to have forgotten that Jesse is not, in fact, a walking meth lab. But Tuco, mesmerized by the blue stuff and Walter's sheer audacity, agrees instantly and even pays in advance. The problem, there's not enough pseudoephedrine in the entire state to cover this order.
We're talking 200-300 boxes of sinus pills.
As always, Walter solves the problem with more science and fewer morals. The solution? Methylamine. With it, they can cook meth on a much larger scale without relying on pharmacy runs. The only catch? They need to steal it. Meanwhile, Skylar's just trying to have a normal moment at her own baby shower. Marie, being Marie, gives Skylar an over-the-top, ridiculously expensive tiara. Just one problem. It's stolen. Skylar finds this out the hard way when she tries to return it and nearly gets slapped with a shoplifting charge. Back on the crime front, Walter and Jesse pull off the methylamine heist. With a little bit of science and a whole lot of nerve, they use thermite to melt through a lock and get away clean. A big win for their criminal career. Skylar confronts Marie about the stolen gift, but Marie plays dumb like she's got a PhD in gaslighting. In the crime van, Walter and Jesse run their first batch using the new method. The result? Pure, potent, and blue. Yep, completely by accident, Walter just created a trademark in the drug game. Tuco is blown away by the new blue meth. But then, out of nowhere, his mood shifts. No reason, no warning. He just snaps and brutally beats one of his own guys. Walter and Jesse freeze, realizing they're not dealing with some businessman of the underworld. No, they've just signed a deal with a full-blown lunatic. Walter wanted a distributor? Well, congratulations. He just got a psycho thrown in for free. Walter comes home, but something's off. He tries to stick to his routine, but there's a distance. He's cold, detached. Skylar senses it immediately. When she tries to figure out what's going on, Walter gets defensive, even aggressive. For the first time, she feels a chill run down her spine while looking at her own husband. Meanwhile, Jesse is in full-on panic mode. After the absolute horror show that was their last encounter with Tuco, all he can think about is how close he is to ending up dead. If Tuco beat one of his own guys to a pulp for no reason, what's stopping him from doing the same, or worse, to them? For Jesse, there's only one option: disappear. But Walter, now more at home in this world than he'd ever admit,
Are you basing that on that he's got like a normal, healthy brain or something?
has another idea. Running? Not a chance. The only way out is through. His solution? A little chemistry trick: ricin, a highly lethal poison extracted from castor beans. The plan is simple: lace the product they're delivering to Tuco and hope he takes the bait. Meanwhile, Hank and the DEA are closing in. Reviewing footage from the methylamine heist, Hank notices something odd. The thieves knew their chemistry, but they clearly weren't pros. With the poison ready, Walter and Jesse prepare to set their plan in motion. It's just a matter of time before Tuco unknowingly signs his own death warrant. And then, everything goes to hell. Before they can even breathe, Tuco makes his move. Jesse shows up at Walter's house, but he's more jittery than usual, pale, sweating bullets. Is it just paranoia? Or does it have something to do with the fact that Tuco is holding him hostage? Yeah, that one. Moments later, Walter is taken too. No arguments allowed. Now, they're both at the mercy of a violent lunatic, and the only thing they know for sure, this won't end well. The hunt for Tuco is on. Hank is leading the charge, convinced the dealer has already bolted to Mexico. But then, he gets a call from Skylar. Walter is missing. Now, on top of tracking down criminals, he has to find his lost brother-in-law. Meanwhile, Walter and Jesse are stuck in the middle of nowhere, held hostage by Tuco and his uncle, Hector Salamanca, a creepy old man who only communicates by furiously ringing a damn bell. Tuco, completely paranoid, decides the best way to fix his problems is to drag the two of them across the border and turn them into his personal chemists. Brilliant plan. Not. Walter and Jesse need to act fast before they end up in Mexico as Tuco's prized possessions. The solution? Slip some ricin into Tuco's lunch. But before they can pull it off, Hector, whose only hobbies seem to be sitting silently and ruining people's lives, senses something is off and starts slamming that bell like it's the fire alarm from hell. Tuco snaps. He demands answers. Walter, backed into a corner, has no choice but to confess.
Tried to poison you because you're an insane, degenerate piece of filth, and you deserve to die.
The result? Tuco goes into full-blown, punch first, ask questions never mode. But then, Jesse finally has his moment. He fights Tuco, manages to grab his gun, and shoots him, leaving him bloodied and barely standing. Just as they're about to make their escape, a car rolls up. Great. More problems. Or maybe not. Turns out, fate has a sense of humor. It's none other than Hank, who's been tailing Jesse, completely unaware that Walter is involved. Tuco, despite being shot, tries to make a move. Bad call. Hank doesn't even hesitate. One bullet later, and Tuco's reign of terror is over. A few days later, Jesse is on a mission to reclaim his stolen money. He tracks down two junkies to a house that looks straight out of a post-apocalyptic movie. But what really shakes him? A little kid living there, sitting in a corner, ignored like a piece of old furniture. Jesse is disturbed but stays focused on the plan. Meanwhile, Gretchen decides to call Skylar to check on Walter's health. But plot twist, Skylar, overwhelmed with gratitude, thanks her for covering the medical bills. Gretchen, who has no idea what she's talking about, realizes something is off and decides to confront Walter. The showdown between Walter and Gretchen happens. She demands to know why he dragged her and Elliot into this lie, but instead of owning up to it, Walter does what he does best: manipulates. He twists the conversation, throwing every past resentment and grudge in her face. Back to Jesse. He confronts Spooge, demanding his money back. The tension is already high, but things take a horrifying turn when Spooge's girlfriend, in a fit of rage, casually drops an ATM on his head. No hesitation, no mercy. Game over. Jesse, in complete shock, still finds the presence of mind to make sure the little boy is safe. He leaves him outside, hoping someone decent will find him and change his fate. In the end, Walter tells Skylar that the Schwartzes won't be paying for his treatment anymore, and just to seal the deal, he feeds her a blatant lie, claiming the couple has gone broke. Just another day in the drug trade until Badger, the most conspicuous meth dealer in history, falls for a sting operation so obvious it's painful to watch. A customer approaches him for product, but the guy looks more like a cop than a cop in a bad action movie. Badger, following the amateur criminal playbook, tries the classic "Are you a cop?" and surprise, he fails miserably. The second the deal goes down, undercover officers swarm in, and Badger is hauled off to jail. Walter and Jesse hit panic mode because a scared Badger is a talkative Badger. The solution? Find someone who can get him out without putting Heisenberg on the front page of the newspaper. Enter Saul Goodman, a lawyer who looks like he walked straight out of a sketchy late-night TV commercial. Walter, playing the role of a low-budget mobster, puts on a disguise and tries to bribe him, but Saul isn't an idiot. He shuts it down immediately and even threatens to call the cops. With no other options, Walter and Jesse do what any so-called criminal masterminds would do. They kidnap the lawyer, but instead of panicking, Saul treats it like just another Wednesday. He sizes them up quickly and realizes they are far from seasoned criminals.
I mean, all due respect, do I have to spell this out for you?
Instead of begging for his life, he jumps straight into negotiation mode. Saul's solution? Hire a guy named Jimmy, someone who specializes in the strangest gig imaginable, getting arrested on behalf of other people. Walter hates the idea, but has no choice. The plan goes down in a DEA-infested area, with Hank right there, meaning one wrong move could land Heisenberg behind bars. As always, Walter improvises at the last second, creating a distraction just in time. In the end, Jimmy takes the fall. The cops think they've scored a big win, and Walter gets to fight another day. Walter assumes this is the last he'll see of Saul, but the lawyer has other plans. He shows up at Walter's job, not with threats, but with a business proposal. No blackmail, just an offer to become partners. Saul lays it out. He can launder Walter's money and make his operation safer and more profitable. And at that moment, Walter realizes something. Saul Goodman might be exactly what he needs to build something far bigger than just cooking meth. He might be the key to an empire. A few days later, Walter is just minding his business, stepping out of his car, when bam, he gets the call. Skylar is in labor, full panic mode. He rushes to the hospital, but fate has a twisted sense of humor. By the time he gets there, it's already over. Holly has been born, and guess who's standing right next to Skylar, all helpful and supportive? That's right, Ted Beneke, the boss who's just a little too interested in Walter's wife. Meanwhile, Jesse gets home and finds out he's been robbed. His entire meth stash, gone, stolen. He freaks out and calls Walter, but of course Walter doesn't answer. And why is that? Because Walter himself took it. That's right. While Jesse is losing his mind thinking some random thief screwed him over, the betrayal actually came from the one person he trusted the most. In the midst of all this chaos, Walter closes a huge deal, stuffing his pockets with a cool $1.2 million. But when it's time to give Jesse his $480,000 cut, Walter just decides he's not going to do that. His excuse? Jesse would just spend it on drugs, as if that money belonged to him in the first place. Moral of the story? Walter is getting way too comfortable screwing people over whenever it suits him. Back home, Walter Jr., completely unaware of just how messed up his dad really is, creates SaveWalterWhite.com, a fundraising website to help cover his father's medical bills. Sweet, right? Well, to Walter, it's just dark irony. He's swimming in cash, but has to keep up the act of being a broke, dying chemistry teacher. But hey, where some see a problem, Saul Goodman sees an opportunity. The smoothest lawyer in New Mexico suggests Walter use the site to launder his money. Anonymous donations? Perfect cover for all that illegal cash. And just like that, Walter Jr.'s heartfelt website turns into a front for his dad's growing drug empire. Meanwhile, Jesse and Jane are in full let's run away and start over mode. New Zealand, clean slate, happy ever after. Everything's looking great, until Jane finds out that Walter kept Jesse's money. She doesn't hesitate. She picks up the phone. Skylar answers and hands it to Walter. And Jane, she goes straight for the throat. Either he gives Jesse the money right now, or she exposes him as a drug dealer.
How do I know she'll keep quiet?
You'll never hear from either of us again.
Later that night, in some random bar, Walter ends up chatting with a guy named Donald Margolis, Jane's dad. Neither of them realizes just how tragically intertwined their lives actually are. After that conversation, Walter makes a decision. He breaks into Jesse's apartment and finds both Jesse and Jane completely out cold, strung out on heroin. And then, it happens. The moment. Jane starts choking on her own vomit. Walter freezes. He could save her. He should save her, but he doesn't. He just stands there, watching as she dies right in front of him. Not by accident, not out of weakness, but because he chooses not to. The night drags on, and Jesse just sits there, frozen, as if sheer willpower could bring Jane back to life. Reality slips through his fingers as he shakes her lifeless body, screaming, crying, begging, but death That bastard doesn't negotiate. Across town, Walter gets a call. Jesse's voice is so wrecked, it barely sounds like him. And Walter, always quick on his feet when it comes to fixing problems he helped create, immediately calls Saul Goodman. Enter Mike, the ultimate cleaner. He arrives to find Jesse completely shattered and, with his usual surgical precision, sets the scene to make it look like nothing more than a tragic accident. You woke up and she was already gone. Simple, straightforward, clean. The kind of lie that sounds so real, even the cops won't question it. Meanwhile, over at the White household, Walter Jr. is over the moon. Because hey, the internet is a magical place when you don't know the truth. The Save Walter White campaign is blowing up, money is rolling in from every corner, and the kid truly believes his dad is just a hardworking family man dealt a bad hand. Skyler, on the other hand, knows something's off. And spoiler alert, it's only going to get worse. Speaking of tragedy, Donald Margolis, Jane's father, arrives at the apartment. He sees the paramedics. He sees his daughter. He watches his entire world collapse in real time. The medics ask their routine questions, and he answers on autopilot. But that kind of pain, it takes root, and it doesn't let go. At the DEA office, Hank, our favorite investigator, and future tragic figure in this story, has a new puzzle on his hands. The blue meth has disappeared from Albuquerque, but it's showing up in other states. Translation, Heisenberg didn't just survive the crackdown, he leveled up. Hank smells blood, but he still has no idea the fox lives in his own family. Speaking of foxes, Walter finds Jesse at rock bottom. The guy can barely breathe between sobs, repeating the same broken record.
I killed her, it was me. I got her back up.
Jesse.
Walter, who literally stood there and watched Jane die without lifting a finger, could correct him, could tell him no, it was an accident, life is cruel. But of course, he doesn't. He just holds Jesse, picks him up off the ground, and gets him out of there. Because that's how you build emotional dependency, letting someone drown in their own guilt while you pretend to be the life raft. Back at the White House, Skyler is connecting the dots, and they don't add up. Walter never visited his mother. Gretchen Schwartz never paid for his treatment. The man she married, the guy who always played the victim, has been lying, but Walter, a gold medalist in dodging the truth, keeps slipping away from her questions. And Skyler, officially done with this circus, grabs Holly and leaves. Because if there's one thing she's learned, it's that men like Walter always have one more lie up their sleeve. And then, the cherry on top. Donald Margolis, trying to piece together some kind of life after his loss, goes back to work as an air traffic controller. The man is broken. He shouldn't be there, but he is. And in the blink of an eye, grief turns into disaster. Walter steps outside and watches the sky rain fire. The episode kicks off with Albuquerque still blanketed in the wreckage of the mid-air collision that claimed 167 lives, a tragedy sparked by the emotional breakdown of air traffic controller Donald Margolis after the death of his daughter Jane. But the crash is just a symptom, the real disease. Walter White's actions, now rippling out across the city like a slow-moving bomb. Meanwhile, Skyler's done playing games. She tells Walt straight up she's moved out and wants to keep the kids far away from him. Her lawyer presses her on where all the money's coming from. But Skyler dodges the question. Right now, her priority is crystal clear. Cut Walt out of her life for good. Walt, on the other hand, is still clinging to the illusion of a normal life. But even that's slipping fast. His relationship with Hank is cracking. Hank senses something's off, and Walt knows deep down he's way past the point of no return. The inevitable showdown between Skyler and Walt finally happens. No more half-truths. Walt lays it all out. He's been cooking meth. That confession doesn't just end their marriage, it detonates it. To Skyler, he's not just a man with secrets anymore. He's a genuine threat. Divorce isn't just an option, it's survival. Across town, Gus makes Walt an offer that sounds too good to pass up. 3 months of work, $3 million. But Walt turns it down, insisting he needs to fix his family first. Gus, ever the cold strategist, doesn't push. He knows Walt's already neck deep in the game, even if Walt's still pretending he's not. I didn't introduce Gus Fring earlier because his importance wasn't really highlighted in the previous season, but for anyone who's never watched the show, here's the context. He's basically a major crime boss who also owns a fast food chain called Los Pollos Hermanos, which he uses to launder money. And then there's Jesse. After some soul searching, he stops running from who he is. No more excuses, no more justifications.
You either run from things, or you face them, Mr. White.
Meanwhile, Skylar finds comfort, and maybe something more, in Ted's cozy home. The calm vibe makes her pause. Ted casually suggests she could leave a few things there, the kind of invite that doesn't come with a key, but definitely comes with implications. Across town, Jesse and Walter clash again. Jesse's suspicious, convinced Walt is playing him, and demands his cut. Walt, ever the manipulator, denies it, and flips the blame, accusing Jesse of cooking with his formula without permission. But let's be real, the money is just the tip of the iceberg. What they're really fighting over is pride. Walt wants credit as the mastermind. Jesse refuses to be treated like some sidekick. At the same time, Hank Schrader inches closer to cracking the case. Following a lead, he tracks down Combo's mom, who casually mentions that Jesse's infamous RV is still in her name. Bingo. For the first time, Hank has a solid link between Jesse and the rolling meth lab. The walls are closing in. Back in the criminal underworld, Gus Fring steps in with a deal that's too good to ignore. A state-of-the-art underground lab, full security, total anonymity, $3 million for 3 months of work. That kind of number doesn't whisper, it screams. Walt is tempted but hesitant. Saying yes means crossing a line he can't uncross. But let's be honest, his ambition has already bulldozed whatever was left of his morality. In the end, Walt does what Walt always does. He picks power. At first, he says no to Gus, but not for long. He comes back and accepts the offer. And with that decision comes an immediate consequence. Jesse's out. Cold and calculated, Walt ends the partnership. A quiet day for a local cop takes a dark turn when he's called in for a welfare check at Miss Pecatewa's house. What he finds? Her decomposing body. Yeah, things escalate fast. And just when it couldn't get any creepier, a mysterious man appears out of nowhere. The cop, confused and clearly on edge, demands the guy surrender, but the stranger says nothing, just stares. The silence only ramps up the tension, like we're seconds away from a deadly showdown. Meanwhile, Skylar's really starting to feel the weight of the money, and Walter keeps insisting it's gonna save the family. Elsewhere, Jesse Pinkman is carving out his own little empire. His DIY meth lab is up and running, crude but functional, and for him, it's a shot at independence, a fresh start. Business is cooking. Back at home, Walter Jr. can tell something's off. His dad's sudden interest in driving him to school and playing Mr. Family Man, it's awkward, forced. He knows these gestures aren't coming from a place of love. Hank, on the other hand, is closer than ever to cracking the case. A lead takes him straight to Jesse's RV, the infamous mobile meth lab, Jackpot. He tracks it down to a junkyard, and suddenly he's standing in front of the rolling crime scene that could blow everything wide open. He's ready to bust in and end it all. But then, the junkyard owner shows up. He starts throwing out arguments, saying the RV is technically a residence, protected by law. And Hank, he refuses to back down. Panic sets in. Walt and Jesse are cornered, but Saul Goodman's still got one last card to play. He sets up a fake emergency call saying Marie, Hank's wife, was in a serious car accident. And just like that, Hank's instincts kick in. He drops everything and rushes to the hospital, leaving the RV and the bust behind. But the truth doesn't stay hidden for long. Hank realizes he's been duped, and he is livid. The humiliation hits hard. His best shot at nailing Jesse slipped right through his fingers. Back at the junkyard, Walter and Jesse finally catch their breath. The RV's gone. The evidence destroyed. Jesse Pinkman's life? Yeah, it's falling apart. Again, before he even gets officially arrested, he ends up on the receiving end of Hank's full-blown rage. Hank goes full beast mode, beating the crap out of Jesse in a scene that could double as a live demo on police brutality.
What's my wife's name? How'd you do it? Talk! Who you working with?
Jesse's left on the floor, bloodied, silent, and Hank, he crosses every ethical line in the book, clearly drowning in his own trauma and lashing out like a man completely lost. Cut to the hospital, where Saul Goodman swoops in like the legal vulture he is, circling tragedy, looking for an angle. Classic Saul. But Jesse, he's way past sarcasm now. He's not just physically wrecked, he's emotionally gutted. Then Walt shows up, doing his usual fake I care routine. He tries to comfort Jesse, but it only makes things worse. Jesse doesn't see Hank as the real bad guy anymore. That role now belongs to Walt, and that betrayal, that's the spark. Jesse's pain turns into rage, and that rage into revenge. Walt and Saul try to patch things up before they spiral out of control. Meanwhile, Hank's left to deal with the fallout of his meltdown. He admits what he did, accepts the suspension, and goes home to Marie with a full-on emotional breakdown. He opens up about how broken he's been since Tuco in El Paso, stuff he's been bottling up for way too long. And just like that, he makes the call. He's done. He can't be be a cop anymore. Back at the lab, Gale makes a mistake. Or maybe Walt just needed a reason. Either way, Walt jumps at the chance to manipulate the situation. He calls Gus and demands to get Jesse back in the game. His pitch? Simple. Gale's not got the chemistry chops. Jesse does. Walt then pays Jesse a visit and offers him a deal, money, and a fresh partnership. But Jesse's not having it. He finally snaps. He tears Walt apart, lays all the pain on the table, and for the first time, really sees Walt for who he is. A walking disaster wrapped in lies and ego. But even with all that, Jesse's vulnerability wins out. And late that night, he gives in. He comes back. The cycle starts all over again. Hank Schrader sits in his car, still trying to process everything that just went down. His phone buzzes. A cold, unfamiliar voice warns him 2 men are coming to kill him. Hank brushes it off, thinking it's some prank call. But the second he steps out of the car, he realizes, big mistake. The Salamanca twins appear, calm and collected. One of them pulls a gun and fires. Hank, running purely on survival instinct, slams the gas and runs one of them over. Wounded, low on ammo, and completely cornered, Hank somehow manages to grab the second twin's gun and fires. Hank makes it out alive, but not without paying the price. Jesse Pinkman stares out at the street. The drug game plays out like it always does. Quick deals, shady glances, throwaway lives. But something's different now. His eyes, once numb to it all, are heavy with guilt and barely contained rage. He watches kids being used like disposable pawns in the filthiest kind of chess match.
I heard it from the sister of the kid who shot him. Hear how I just said kid?
And then the gut punch hits. Later that day, Thomas's body is found. The kid was executed, taken out by the dealers working under Gus. Andrea is shattered, completely undone by the grief. And for Jesse, that heartbreak turns into something much darker. Blind, unrelenting vengeance. Fueled by hate, Jesse turns to Walter. He asks him for ricin, something subtle, a quiet way to take them out without drawing heat. But Walt shuts him down. He sees the storm Jesse can't. If Jesse makes a move, it's game over. Going after those dealers means picking a fight with Gus. And that's a death sentence. The pressure builds until something's gotta give. Walter meets with Gus and Mike. It's not a heart-to-heart. It's a warning. Jesse's becoming a liability. Meanwhile, Jesse gears up. He's not looking to negotiate. He's looking for payback. No second thought. Just raw fury. He's ready to die if that's what it takes to make things right for Thomas. Then, bam, out of nowhere, Walter barrels down the street and mows the 2 dealers down with his car. The hit is savage. One dies instantly, body slammed into the pavement. The other, bleeding and broken, tries to crawl away, but Walter's already made his call. No hesitation, just one clean shot. Jesse stands frozen, stunned. This was no rescue. It was a declaration of war. There's no turning back now. Walter's running out of time. Gus has lost trust in him. The cartel is making moves, and the balance of power is shifting fast. Walter realizes that Gale isn't just a lab assistant anymore. He's being trained to replace him. Every lesson, every instruction Gale gets, is one more step toward making Walt completely disposable. Meanwhile, Mike, our favorite grumpy grandpa, shares a rare tender moment with his granddaughter, Kaylee. But the peace doesn't last. At the Los Polos Hermanos warehouse, Mike has to deal with Chow, a nervous supplier who's dragging his feet. The message is loud and clear. Hesitation has no place in Gus's empire. Back at his place, Gale gets a surprise visit from Gus. The conversation is polite, but there's tension in the air. Gus casually asks if Gale is ready to run the lab solo. Gale hesitates, says he might need a few more sessions with Walter. Gus doesn't argue. He just tells him he better be ready. And that's when it clicks for Walter. His clock's ticking. He meets with Jesse and lays it out. Gale has to go. Jesse's stunned. This is a line he doesn't want to cross.
I can't do it, Mr. White.
He even tells Walter to go to the cops, but Walter shuts that down immediately. If Gale lives, Gus doesn't need them, and if Gus doesn't need them, they're dead. So the decision's made. Jesse finds Gale's address and passes it to Walter. But before Walter can make a move, Victor shows up and drags him to the lab. Mike's already there, waiting. It's not subtle. Walter knows exactly what's about to happen. He's going to be executed. In the lab, Walter manages to get a call through to Jesse. His voice is sharp, urgent. There's no time to explain. He just says what needs to be done. Jesse gets it. No more thinking, no more time. We hit the final moment. Jesse knocks. Gale opens the door, confused. Then he sees the gun, and the fear sets in. He pleads, offers money, tries to talk his way out. Jesse's shaking, panicking. He never wanted to kill anyone, but now he has no choice. A gunshot. Cut to black. The new season kicks off with a brutal reminder. No one's safe. Gale is dead, Jesse pulled the trigger, and Gus makes it painfully clear who's calling the shots. Victor's murder isn't just a warning, it's a full-blown horror show. Meanwhile, Skylar starts picking up on the unease. Walt's car is in the driveway, but no Walt. It's the kind of thing only a wife would notice, and she does. It doesn't take her long to knock on Saul Goodman's door. Saul, as always, tries to play it cool, part lawyer, part conspiracy theorist. He used to be hesitant about getting too involved, but that train's left the station. Whether she likes it or not, Skylar's in this now. Jesse, on the other hand, is spiraling. On the outside, he's all blank stares and video games, driving aimlessly, eating junk food, filling the hours with whatever meaningless distraction he can find. Hank's stuck in a different kind of prison, his own body. The slow recovery eats away at him, but what's really killing him is the loss of the job he lived for. He's filling that void with a new obsession, collecting minerals. Marie tries to pull him back to reality, but Hank's checked out. His body may be stuck at home, but his mind is still at the crime scene, circling one name, Gale. Back in the lab, Walt and Jesse are back to work, pretending like everything's normal. Walt knows exactly what's going on. He may have made it out alive this time, but the illusion of control is gone. No more master plans, no more safety nets. Just a deadly game where one wrong move might be your last. Gus Fring, sharp as ever in his suit and with that trademark unshakable calm, he enters the room where Hector Salamanca, once a feared and respected man, now sits frozen in a wheelchair. He can't speak, can barely move, but oh, he can still hate. Gus stops right in front of him. He wants Hector to remember every detail, every loss, every humiliation. What he really wants is to see that fire in Hector's eyes, to watch him suffer with the realization that, yeah, he might still be breathing, but the war's been over for him for a long time, and he lost. Meanwhile, Hank Schrader is out here playing the world's most dangerous game of cat and mouse. And spoiler, he has no idea how close he is to getting burned.
Is Gustavo Fring your real name? I know you're a Chilean national, but there are no records of you ever living there.
In a tense moment with Walt, Hank drops a bomb. He's investigating Gus Fring. He's pretty sure the guy's not just flipping curly fries, he's a straight-up drug kingpin. But without proof, Hank needs help. So he asks Walt to plant a tracker on Gus's car. Walt, naturally, freaks out on the inside. On the outside, he fumbles through excuses and tries to play it cool. But every second of hesitation feels like a spotlight. And Walt knows it. The walls are closing in. But Gus doesn't wait to be cornered. He walks into their office like he's just there to renew his driver's license. Calm, collected. He knows his fingerprints were found in Gail Bildischer's apartment, and the agents want answers. Not a crack in his voice, not a blink out of place. Like a surgeon, he cuts through their suspicions. He spins a story. Gail was a scholarship student. They met a few times. Nothing serious. No shady business. Just philanthropy and good PR. One by one, the agents start nodding along, all except Hank. He still smells something off, but with no proof, he's stuck waiting for the next move. Then, just when you think things couldn't get heavier, we flash back to Mexico. A younger Gus walks into the lion's den. He's less cold, less hardened. Beside him is Max Arciniega. Brilliant, confident, the kind of guy who could sell ice in a snowstorm. Max pitches to Don Eladio. They've got something big. Crystal meth, purer than anything out there. A gold mine if the cartel backs them. But Don Eladio, he's not easy to impress. He listens, smiles, and responds the only way cartel bosses know how, with blood. Out of nowhere, Hector Salamanca pulls the trigger. Max drops, just like that. His blood paints the floor. And Gus can't move, can't scream, can't fight back. All he can do is watch and remember. That's the moment Gus Fring, the man we know, was born. Back in the present, Gus stands in front of Hector once more. He brings it all back. The day, the killing, every second of it. He paints the scene in brutal detail, forcing Hector to relive the same pain Gus has carried for years. But this time, the tables have turned. Now Gus is the one in control, and Hector, he can only sit there, powerless, watching. Sometime later, the chess match between Walter White and Gus Fring came down to the final move, and every decision now meant life or death. Meanwhile, Jesse Pinkman finds himself in a situation completely out of his hands. Brock, Andrea's son, is in the hospital, and the cops are breathing down his neck.
Jesse, why'd you tell Brock's mom that the boy had been poisoned?
Detectives grill him for answers, and Jesse has to stay cool while trying to figure out who the hell poisoned the kid. But while Jesse's distracted, Walt is making his final move. He knows going after Gus directly is basically a death sentence. The guy's surrounded by bodyguards, cameras, and has spidey senses when it comes to danger. But there's one unexpected piece left on the board: Hector Salamanca. At Casa Tranquila nursing home, Walter approaches the old cartel relic. Even though Hector's stuck in a wheelchair, barely a shell of his former self, he's still breathing pure hatred. His eyes burn with an ancient fire, fueled by years of humiliation and pain. Walter doesn't sugarcoat it. Gus wiped out Hector's entire bloodline, turned him into a ghost with a heartbeat, but now he can have his revenge. Hector doesn't speak, but the answer's in his eyes. The plan is on. Step 1, get Gus to take the bait. Hector demands a meeting with the DEA, specifically Hank Schroeder. The agents are confused, but go with it. In the interrogation room, Hector slowly spells out an insult that's as childish as it is useless. For the DEA, it's a complete waste of time, but for Gus Fring, it's a red flag the size of New Mexico. Gus hears the news and, as expected, doesn't send anyone else to handle it. He wants to see it for himself. He rolls up to the nursing home with 2 of his guys, fully expecting this to be his final face-off with Hector Salamanca. When he steps into the room, his voice drips with contempt. He tells Hector it's over. He's nothing, just waiting for death. But something's off. For the first time, Hector looks him dead in the eye, and Gus feels it. That stare cuts like ice. Then the bell rings. Not for help, it's the trigger. Walter's bomb goes off, ripping through the room in a brutal explosion. Hector is gone instantly, but then, through the smoke, a figure emerges. Gus Fring, somehow still standing, calmly adjusts the cuff of his suit, but then the camera pans. Half of his face is missing, just gone. He staggers out into the hallway, and drops. Gus Fring is dead. The empire he built on precision and fear collapses in an instant. Walter and Jesse return to the underground lab, the heart of everything Gus created, and they burn it all to the ground. Every trace of their involvement gone. The lab erupts into flames, burying Gus's legacy for good. But Jesse learns something that flips everything on its head. Brock wasn't poisoned with ricin. It was lily of the valley, a common but still deadly plant. Gus had nothing to do with it. The truth should point Jesse in a darker direction, but it doesn't. He doesn't connect the dots. He doesn't realize he was a pawn, that Walter White used a kid to push his plan across the finish line. The phone rings. It's Skylar, panicked, desperate for answers after seeing the news. She asks what happened. Walter's answer is simple.
I won.
Time has passed, but something's off. Walter White, now a changed man, just a cold, empty stare. He's sitting alone in a diner, sporting a rough new look and going by a fake name. A stranger hands him a car key. He unlocks the trunk of a car parked outside. Inside, an M60 machine gun. Back in the present, the war's not over yet. The board still has pieces left to clear. Walter, Jesse, and Mike are on cleanup duty. They need to erase every trace that could tie them to that secret lab. There's just one big problem: the surveillance footage. Gus had cameras everywhere, and all that footage, it's now in the hands of the DEA. The hard drive is locked up at the precinct. High risk. But Walter, being Walter, already has a plan, and that plan involves magnets. Yup, magnets. Walter and Jesse rope Mike into helping them pull off a ridiculously bold stunt. Then they park it right outside the police station and blast it with full power, wiping the hard drive clean without ever stepping inside the building. The plan goes off without a hitch. Mike, ever the skeptic, isn't convinced it actually worked, but Walter just grins, cockier than ever. Because I say it worked, he says. And just like that, we know the old Walter White is gone. All that's left now is Heisenberg. Meanwhile, Skylar White is going through her own transformation. She looks at Walter and feels fear, but worse than that, she sees something even more disturbing. He's proud of himself. He's not just surviving, he's winning. And when even Saul Goodman, the slimiest lawyer in the Southwest, says he wants out, Skylar realizes just how far gone her husband really is. Walter pours his heart out to Hank. Well, at least that's what he wants Hank to believe. It's all part of the game now. Half-truths, subtle manipulations, playing both sides like a chess master in a meth lab. Meanwhile, Lydia is sweating bullets. She's face to face with Mike, with Jesse and Walter watching like silent executioners. She's got one shot to stay alive. Hands shaking, she calls Hank, pretending she found a tracker on one of the methylamine barrels. Her life depends on sounding convincing. Hank checks it out, nothing from the DEA. The call ends. Lydia lives, for now. But Lydia knows surviving isn't enough. She has to make herself indispensable. So, she drops a wild idea on the table. Let's rob a train. There's this stretch of track, a radio dead zone, perfect for a clean heist. Mike hates it. Too risky. Too many variables. But Lydia knows how to sell it. Back at the White household, Skylar's suffocating.
Got what you wanted, that's what. Congratulations.
The walls feel like they're closing in. Every minute with Walt is like holding your breath underwater. But this time, she doesn't fold. She draws the line. The kids are leaving. Walter brushes it off like always. Skylar doesn't argue. She just makes it clear she'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe. The crew gets to work. Walt, Jesse, Mike, and Todd map out the plan. Timing has to be razor sharp. Fake a mechanical breakdown, stop the train, siphon out the methylamine, replace it with water of the exact same weight, and vanish before anyone notices. The day comes. The desert is quiet. The team in position. The train appears in the distance. Right on cue, the truck blocks the tracks and breaks down. The engineers hop out to investigate. While they're distracted, Jesse and Todd move fast. The blue gold starts flowing through the hoses. Mike watches every second like a hawk. One misstep and it's all over. But then, problem. A local guy just happens to show up. A good old Samaritan trying to lend a hand. He's not supposed to be here. No one counted on this wild card. The clock's ticking. The train starts to roll earlier than expected. Jesse and Todd scramble to seal everything up. At the last possible second, Todd jumps clear. They did it. Success, but it doesn't last. Out of the dust, a kid on a dirt bike appears. Just a kid, curious, innocent, not running, not scared, just watching. And then, without missing a beat, Todd pulls a gun and shoots. The kid hits the ground, gone. Jesse freezes, stunned, in the heart of the desert, where the heat bends the horizon and the silence weighs heavier than a loaded gun. Three vehicles converge. On one side, Walter White, Jesse Pinkman, and Mike Ehrmantraut. On the other, Declan and his crew. It was supposed to be simple. Sell the methylamine, shake hands, walk away. But Walter White doesn't do simple. Declan's there to buy. Walt, he's there to conquer. He doesn't want a one-time payout. He wants Declan to shut down his own operation and start pushing his product instead, because Heisenberg isn't chasing cash. He's chasing power. The dealers trade wary looks. Who the hell does this guy think he is? Calling the shots. But Walt holds firm. His tone is ice cold. His words precise. He commands. And in the end, Declan folds. With the deal sealed, Mike uses the moment to tap out for good. He wants his $5 million and a ticket out of this life. But before he vanishes, he leaves Walt with one last warning. The DEA planted bugs. If they're not dealt with, everything could come crashing down. Jesse's ready to bounce too. Everything they've done, it's crushed him. He just wants his cut and a clean break, but Walt refuses. He gaslights, guilt trips, insists Jesse's too important to walk away.
Come on, don't worry. We'll figure it out.
Meanwhile, the DEA tightens the noose around Mike. A warrant's issued. His house gets raided, but Mike, always 10 steps ahead, vanishes before they can catch him. He turns to Saul Goodman, needs his go bag, cash, passport, new ID. He's ready to disappear, but he can't go pick it up himself. Saul hesitates. Things are heating up fast, but before he can say no, Walt volunteers to deliver it. The meeting happens by the river, a setting too heavy with meaning to ignore. Mike's ready to vanish, but Walt didn't come just to say goodbye. He wants something. The names of the 9 guys still locked up, the only loose ends that can tie him back to Gus Fring's operation. Mike refuses. Those names don't belong to Walt, and that's when Walt snaps. The rage, always just beneath the surface, finally spills over. He pulls the trigger. The shot echoes into the emptiness. Mike stumbles, drags himself to a rock by the water's edge. He stares out at the river, one last moment of peace before the end. Walt mumbles something, maybe an apology.
I'm sorry, Mike. This whole thing could have been avoided. Shut the fuck up.
Walter sits in silence, listening as Lydia, paranoid as always, lays it all out. She's got what he needs. The names of Mike's 9 guys, the last loose ends tying him to Gus Fring's empire. But Lydia knows giving up that info makes her a liability, and liabilities don't usually get happy endings. Before Walt can give her a yes or no, Lydia switches gears. Heisenberg's blue meth already owns the local market, but there's a whole country begging for a better high, the Czech Republic. Apparently 5% of the population is already hooked. The distribution network's locked and loaded. They just need a supplier. Walt listens, and for the first time, he starts thinking globally. Maybe Kingpin of Albuquerque isn't enough anymore. Meanwhile, across various prisons in the city, a brutal symphony plays out with terrifying precision. In less than 2 minutes, Jack Welker's crew wipes out every one of Walt's potential snitches. One guy gets stabbed mid-lunch. Another is choked out in the showers. Dan Wachsberger, the lawyer stashing Mike's money, doesn't even stand a chance. By the time the alarms go off, the job's already done. Silence has officially been bought. At the DEA, Hank watches the news unfold. His eyes don't move. He knows this wasn't random. Someone pulled the strings. But with no evidence, all he can do is stew in frustration. Elsewhere, Skyler drives Walt to a storage unit. When he steps inside, he's greeted by a mountain of cash, enough to make a Wall Street banker blush. Skyler doesn't even know how much there is anymore. She gave up counting ages ago. It's more than they could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. And with the kind of desperation that sounds a lot like defeat, she asks for just one thing: that he stops, that he walks away while he still can. And for a second, Walt actually considers it. The great Heisenberg, thinking about calling it quits. Across town, Jesse Pinkman is trying to live a normal life, or at least fake it well enough to pass. But ghosts don't care about new routines. A car pulls up outside his house. Walt steps out. The air turns ice cold. Jesse braces for the usual: manipulation, threats, some pitch to drag him back into the abyss. But Walt just talks. And before he leaves, he drops a duffel bag full of cash at Jesse's feet. Jesse stares at it, baffled, unsure what any of it means. Back at the White household, dinner looks shockingly normal. Hank, Marie, Skyler, and Walt share a meal like a picture-perfect suburban family. And then Walt drops the bomb.
I'm out.
Skyler's stunned, but for the first time in forever, she allows herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe it really is over. Later in the bathroom, Hank's flipping through a book left on the toilet tank, just killing time. Nothing serious, until his eyes land on a handwritten note. Gail Bodacher's voice echoes in his head. The puzzle pieces start snapping into place. Every ignored hunch. Every time he looked at Walt and saw a mild-mannered chemistry teacher.
12 seconds later.
Walter White watches, helpless, as Jack Welker puts a bullet in Hank Schrader's head. Cold, brutal, and in the middle of the desert. All of Walt's choices come crashing down in that moment. But the neo-Nazi gang couldn't care less. They loot his fortune, and just to twist the knife, leave him with a single barrel of cash. A reminder of everything he's lost. Jesse Pinkman, beaten, broken, and barely hanging on, isn't killed. But what Walter does next is even crueler. He looks Jesse dead in the eyes and confesses that he let Jane die. No emotion, no remorse, just cold, hard truth. Jesse's dragged off, not to be executed, but to be chained up like a slave, forced to cook meth for the gang. Walt heads home, hoping to disappear, but Skyler figures it out. Hank is dead, and whatever was left of their relationship goes up in flames. She grabs a knife. Flynn jumps in to defend his mom, and in that moment, he turns on Walt completely. The family calls the cops. There's no coming back from this. Panicked, Walt grabs baby Holly and runs. But when she starts crying for her mom, something flickers inside him. Some shred of humanity he thought was gone. He leaves her somewhere safe, to be found. Later, Skyler gets a call. It's Walt. But this time, he's not the broken man we just saw. He's cold, calculated, and full of rage. He blames her for everything, spewing venom down the line. But it's all for show. He knows the cops are listening. He's protecting her, clearing her name, making sure she won't go down with him. And so, Walter White disappears into the great unknown. Snow piles up on the abandoned car. Walter White returns to Albuquerque like a ghost. But he's not here for a trip down memory lane. He has a plan. First stop, the Schwartz mansion. Gretchen and Elliot, his former friends, co-founders of Gray Matter, are living the life that should have been his. Big house, big money, a life wrapped in comfort and safety. Walter slips in unnoticed, a ghost from the past. When they see him, they freeze. They try to reason with him, maybe appeal to some shred of the old Walt. But he's not here for revenge. He's here with a proposition. When Flynn turns 18, they're to hand him $9.72 million. No strings attached. And to make sure they follow through, Walt spins a lie about having hitmen watching their every move. Two phantom shadows that'll haunt them for life. And they buy it.
Don't move, don't dare move a muscle. You don't want them to think that you're trying to get away.
Before disappearing for good, there's someone he has to see. Skyler now lives in a cramped apartment, stripped of everything she once had. The feds are watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. Walter finds her there, and for the first time, he tells the truth. He didn't do all of this for the family. He did it because he liked it, because he was good at it. The confession comes too late to fix anything. He leaves her with the GPS coordinates to Hank and Gomez's burial site, a last bargaining chip she can use with the DEA. He looks at her for a moment. No apologies. promise. No more lies. Before he leaves, he sees Holly one last time. Outside, he catches a glimpse of Flynn, now grown, now filled with a rage no words could ever undo. The end is close. Walter heads to Jack Welker's hideout. The men who stole his money, the men who turned Jesse into a slave. He shows up looking like hell, sick, broken, barely able to stand. Jack and his crew eye him with suspicion, but Walt's got one last play. Right on cue, he triggers the automated machine gun stashed in his car's trunk. All hell breaks loose. Bullets rip through walls, through bodies. In a matter of seconds, it's a massacre. When the dust settles, nearly everyone is dead. Jesse's there, chained up, broken. He lunges, wrapping the chains around Todd's neck. His hands tighten until the only thing left is silence. When Todd finally goes still, Jesse gasps for air. Jack, wounded and desperate, tries to cut a deal. He offers Walter the last of the money, but Walt isn't listening. He pulls the trigger before Jack can even finish his sentence. Now, it's just the two of them. Walter looks at Jesse and tosses him the gun. A silent invitation. Jesse catches it. He could end it right there, but he's done taking orders. For the first time in forever, Jesse has a choice, and he chooses to live. Without looking back, Jesse jumps in a car and floors it. He laughs. He cries. He screams. The past is in the rear view. Walter stays behind, his breathing ragged, blood soaking through his shirt, but he doesn't run. He doesn't even try, his fingers brushing over the equipment like he's saying goodbye to an old friend. This was his true legacy, the one place he ever felt truly alive. Walter stumbles, then collapses to the floor, and just like that, Walter White is gone, and the empire of Heisenberg crumbles.